In June 1954, the government of Guatemala began to collapse beneath the sound of a war that was smaller than it seemed. A rebel force approached from Honduras. Aircraft bombed selected targets. A secret radio station announced victories that had not happened and described armies that barely existed. Inside Guatemala City, officers began to doubt whether the president could survive. On June 27th, Jacobo Arbenz resigned. The event would be presented as a victory against communism, but beneath the Cold War language was a dispute over land owned by the United Fruit Company. Arbenz's agrarian reform targeted large estates left uncultivated. The government offered compensation based partly on values the owners had declared for tax purposes. United Fruit insisted its land was worth far more. It drew in lobbyists, diplomats, intelligence officers, landowners, and military planners, ending with a US-backed covert operation and the removal of an elected president. The banana did not march across the border or force Arbenz from office. But the commercial system built around it helped create the conditions in which a government became disposable. That is the first strange truth of this story. The fruit was soft. The system around it was not. And to understand how a tropical plant acquired that power, we have to return to a time when bananas were not cheap, identical, or easy to eat. The wild ancestors of modern bananas did not resemble the smooth fruit found in supermarkets. Many were crowded with large, hard seeds, leaving little soft flesh between them. In the forests and wet valleys of New Guinea and Southeast Asia, early cultivators noticed rare plants with more edible pulp and fewer developed seeds. They preserved those plants not by waiting for useful seeds, but by cutting shoots from the base and planting them again. Generation after generation, human selection transformed a difficult wild fruit into dependable food. In humid tropical environments, a perennial plant producing heavy clusters of starchy fruit could feed families without the constant cycle of plowing and sowing required by annual grains. Bananas and plantains could be boiled, roasted, fermented, dried, and carried. Their leaves became cooking surfaces and roofing material. Their fibers became rope and cloth. What looks like a simple fruit was already a technology, shaped by patient observation and repeated human choice. But the achievement came with a hidden dependency. Most cultivated bananas are sterile. They cannot reproduce normally from seed. They survive because people copy them, shoot by shoot, plant by plant. Long before corporations, the banana depended on a partnership with humans. The first banana system was a chain of care. Yet that chain also made the fruit portable, and once people became its method of reproduction, the banana could travel wherever people carried it. Its movement across the world was slow, complicated, and far older than the heroic stories usually told about it. Most people have heard some version of Alexander the Great encountering bananas in India and introducing them to the West. But that is not what explains their spread. Bananas moved through overlapping migrations, trade routes, island networks, and farming traditions across the Asia-Pacific region. Different varieties crossed with one another. Cultivators carried shoots between villages and across water. The plant moved west through South Asia and the Indian Ocean world, reaching parts of Africa long before European colonial powers understood its history. In one place, it became a staple. Elsewhere, it became drink, medicine, fiber, ritual object, or trade good. The banana was never one thing. It was a family of cultivated plants adapted to different climates and human needs. European expansion later carried established varieties into the Atlantic world and the Americas. But Europeans did not invent the banana's global journey. They entered a story already thousands of years old. What changed under colonial trade was not simply where the plant grew. It was why. A household crop exists to feed people near it. A commodity crop exists to satisfy a buyer far away. That difference would transform the land around the banana. It would also create a new problem. Bananas bruise easily, ripen quickly, and begin deteriorating as soon as they are cut. To sell them across an ocean, merchants needed to defeat time. During the 19th century, traders learned that bananas could be harvested green and shipped before ripening. The idea sounds simple. The machinery required to make it reliable was not. A plantation had to cut the fruit at the correct stage. Laborers had to carry heavy bunches without damaging them. Trains had to reach ports on schedule. Ships had to cross warm seas before the cargo became waste. A broken locomotive, rough handling, or several hot days could destroy an entire harvest. Steam power shortened voyages. Railroads connected interior plantations to the coast. Ventilated and later refrigerated holds slowed ripening. Warehouses and ripening rooms allowed distributors to decide when green fruit would become yellow near the point of sale. The banana became a race against biology, and the companies that won controlled every stage of that race. United Fruit, formed in 1899, grew by combining plantations, transportation, and distribution on a scale few competitors could match. Its ships became known as the Great White Fleet. Its rail lines cut through tropical regions, primarily to move fruit toward foreign markets. In the United States and Europe, bananas shifted from exotic curiosity to mass consumption. Advertising presented them as wholesome, modern, convenient, and affordable. The low price looked natural. It was not. Cheapness had been engineered through speed, scale, land concessions, disciplined labor, and the transfer of risk to places consumers would never see. The clean yellow surface hid a chain that was becoming larger, faster, and harder to challenge. To guarantee a steady supply, banana companies could not stop at owning plantations. They needed railways, ports, telegraph lines, warehouses, shipping fleets, hospitals, worker housing, stores, schools, and political agreements. In some regions, the company arrived before the state had built much infrastructure. That allowed it to appear as both employer and government. A worker might live in a company house, receive treatment in a company clinic, buy food at a company store, and travel on a company railway built to carry the crop he harvested. These systems provided real services and created deep dependence. If workers challenged wages or conditions, they were not confronting only a boss. They were confronting the institution controlling transport, housing, medical care, and access to the outside economy. Governments faced a similar trap. A company could promise investment in exchange for tax exemptions, land grants, and favorable regulation. Once the railway existed, national exports might depend on it. Once the port existed, government revenue might flow through it. The company only needed to become difficult to remove. By the early 20th century, United Fruit and its rivals had turned parts of Central America and the Caribbean into vertically integrated export zones. Useful things have a dangerous destiny. Eventually, someone tries to own them. The banana had begun as a solution to hunger. It had become a tool of trade. Now the tool was becoming a private system of territory, transport, and law. And once corporations controlled the roads carrying the fruit, they needed governments willing to keep those roads open. In Honduras, the relationship between bananas and political power became almost impossible to hide. In 1910, businessman Sam Zemere feared that changes in taxation and debt policy could threaten his Cuyamel fruit company. He backed Manuel Bonilla, a former Honduran president living in exile, and helped finance an armed expedition to return him to power. The rebels used a converted vessel called the Hornet, landed on the Honduran coast, gathered support, and fought government forces. President Miguel Davila eventually left office, and Bonilla returned to the presidency. Foreign pressure, domestic conflict, and personal ambition made the story more complicated than one businessman choosing a ruler. But the result was unmistakable. Banana interests had become participants in regime change. Around the same era, the writer O. Henry, drawing on his experience in Honduras, used the phrase "Banana Republic" for a fictional country dominated by political instability and export dependence. The phrase survived because it described something people recognized. These were nations where a narrow commodity economy could make presidents vulnerable, foreign companies unusually powerful, and public policy subordinate to ports and plantations. By the way, if you've made it this far, you probably already see the pattern. This channel is not really about objects. It is about the systems hiding inside them. So if that kind of history interests you, subscribe. Now, back to the darker part. The banana system did not control only presidents. It controlled the lives of the people who cut, carried, and loaded the fruit. In 1928, workers in Colombia's banana zone stopped working. Their demands were not mysterious. They wanted direct employment instead of layers of contractors used to avoid responsibility. They wanted compensation for workplace injuries, better medical care, hygienic housing, regular wages, and payment in money rather than systems tying them to company stores. These requests threatened more than a single harvest. A successful strike could weaken the labor structure that kept fruit moving on time. The Colombian government deployed soldiers. In the town of Ciénaga, workers and families gathered near the railway while officials demanded that the crowd disperse. Then the army opened fire. The number killed remains disputed, and estimates have ranged widely. The uncertainty makes the event more haunting, not less revealing. A modern export system had created a place where the schedule of a foreign-owned commodity could be treated as a matter of national security. The massacre entered Colombian memory, but for consumers abroad the banana remained clean, cheerful, and inexpensive. This was one of the system's greatest achievements. Distance did not merely transport the fruit. It separated the buyer from the consequences of production. The object had not changed. The world around it had. In Colombia, state violence protected the flow of bananas from organized workers. In Guatemala, the threat would rise higher. This time, the person obstructing the system was not a labor leader. It was the president. Jacobo Arbenz did not come to power promising to destroy foreign companies. His government sought to modernize Guatemala and weaken the concentration of land that left many rural families with little or nothing to cultivate. Decree 900 allowed the state to expropriate certain uncultivated portions of large estates and redistribute them. That struck directly at United Fruit, which controlled enormous areas, some held in reserve rather than actively planted. The dispute over compensation exposed an uncomfortable contradiction. The government based payment partly on values the company had previously declared for taxation. United Fruit argued that the land's real value was much higher. What had helped lower taxes became disastrous when the same figures were used to calculate compensation. The company lobbied aggressively in Washington and supported a narrative portraying Guatemala as a communist threat. But the familiar version is too simple. United Fruit did not press a secret button and command the American government to remove Arbenz. Cold War fear, US strategy, elite opposition, military uncertainty, and corporate influence converged. That complexity does not absolve the company. It reveals how power works. Corporations rarely need total control when their interests align with stronger institutions. Operation PBSUCCs used a small invasion force, psychological warfare, air attacks, diplomatic pressure, and radio deception to magnify the appearance of inevitable defeat. Arbenz lost the confidence of key officers and resigned. The banana had not toppled a government alone, but land reform had collided with a system in which private property, foreign policy, propaganda, and covert action reinforced one another. A solution became valuable. Value attracted power. Power built rules. And when a government tried to rewrite those rules, the system removed the government. The banana companies survived political crises, labor conflicts, and public scandal. Then an enemy appeared that could not be bribed or overthrown. For decades, the export trade depended heavily on a variety called Gros Michel. It produced large, attractive fruit and survived shipping better than many alternatives. Companies planted it across vast territories, creating fields of nearly identical plants. That uniformity made production predictable. It also made disaster predictable. A soil-borne fungus caused Panama disease, attacking the plants from below and blocking the tissues carrying water. Once land became infested, the disease could persist. Plantations declined. Companies abandoned infected areas, cleared new land, and watched the pattern return. Gros Michel did not become completely extinct, as popular stories sometimes claim. It survived in limited cultivation, but it became too vulnerable for the dominant export machine. By the 1960s, the industry shifted to Cavendish bananas, which resisted the strain then devastating Gros Michel. Farms were replanted, shipping systems adjusted, and consumers accepted a fruit that looked similar but tasted somewhat different. The supermarket banana appeared to survive unchanged because the system concealed the replacement. This was not a triumph over monoculture. It was an escape from one monoculture into another. The companies solved a biological crisis without abandoning the demand for uniformity. The fruit changed. The logic did not. And that decision carried the old vulnerability into the modern world. Today, the Cavendish banana is so ordinary that its perfection seems natural. It arrives with nearly the same shape, texture, ripening pattern, and price across thousands of stores. But every identical fruit is evidence of an enormous structure: cloned plants, disease controls, plantation chemicals, irrigation systems, workers, contracts, refrigerated ships, warehouses, ripening chambers, supermarket standards, and international price pressure. The system remains efficient because variation is treated as a problem. Yet variation is also how living things survive. A newer strain of the fungus, tropical race 4, can attack Cavendish plants. It spreads through contaminated soil, water, tools, vehicles, footwear, and planting material. Once established, it can make production on infected land extremely difficult for years. The threat extends far beyond shoppers losing a familiar snack. Bananas and plantains are essential foods and sources of income for hundreds of millions of people, many of whom had little role in building the export system that standardized the Cavendish. The same machinery that made bananas cheap in wealthy markets helped create biological vulnerability where the crop matters most. This is the modern consequence hiding inside the fruit. The banana began as a human answer to hunger. It became a portable crop, then a commodity, then an infrastructure, then a political force, then a monoculture exposed to collapse. What began as a solution became a system of control. The banana did not topple governments on its own, but the system built to keep it cheap made workers replaceable, land negotiable, and governments expendable. The strange part is not that humans transformed the banana. The strange part is that the banana system transformed countries, then disappeared behind a price sticker. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us which ordinary food, object, invention, or system we should uncover next. The most harmless things often cast the longest shadows.